challenging thing is that we have seen no real de-escalation efforts by Putin and the Russian forces. There may have been some forces that have moved around a bit, but no indications of de-escalation. Matter of fact, the Russians just today have already tried to kick out the second ranking diplomat in the American embassy. And we've seen reports, at least, of Russian shelling potentially into the eastern region of Ukraine, potentially in an effort to get the Ukrainians to react, which would then be the pretext for what could be a major Russian invasion that would not be simply limited in the east, but literally, as intelligence has come forward, could involve capturing Kiev, the 4 million people international capital of Ukraine, historic city, that would involve major air attacks, ground attacks in terms of tanks and other activities, and obviously challenges around cyber attacks. And I want to come back to that in a moment. I do think the administration and the West has shown a united front. Literally over the last few weeks, there's not been almost a day that's gone by where there's not been a European or American leader in Kiev meeting with the Ukrainian leadership, or as recently as this week, the German chancellor going to Moscow. So there's constant diplomatic initiatives. I call it flooding the zone. So hopefully not having Russia invade while you've got a European leader on the ground in Ukraine. We've seen as well and continue to see these images of Ukrainians training for an insurgency. I think people assume that the Russian military could overwhelm the Ukrainian military, although we've sent them a lot of defensive weapons. But these images of Ukrainian citizens training so that even if the Russians were to overwhelm the military, that there would be an insurgency that the Russian troops would pay a heavy toll for, I think is important. And I want to particularly commend American and British and other intelligence services, because unlike historically where the intelligence community has been reluctant to share information, we've seen over the last few weeks the intelligence community say, hey, if there's going to be a coup, it's not going to be Ukrainian driven, it's going to be Russian driven. The British even outlined who the individual the Russians would put in, and then there was intelligence indications that there might have been a video that would have appeared that would have shown dead bodies. They were actually going to be Russian cadavers used for this propaganda video, and I think that put that off. And we've seen the intelligence community lean forward even with specific dates. And luckily, that activity, I believe, has pushed Putin back, at least on a temporary basis. One of the things I'm particularly concerned about as chair of the Intelligence Committee and as the chair of the Cybersecurity Caucus is the potential effects of a major cyber attack. We've seen kind of low-level cyber attacks in the last couple of days hitting Ukrainian banks and hitting certain Ukrainian government agencies. My fear is twofold. One, if Russia launches a massive cyber attack, for example, trying to shut down Ukrainian power or water systems or other basic infrastructure, because our networks are all intertwined, it's very likely that that kind of attack, once you let that bug out, you can't control it, it could have huge ramifications, for example, in neighboring Poland, which is a NATO nation, and could suddenly raise a whole host of questions that have, up to this date, have been hypothetical, but could be the reality of what level of cyber attack constitutes an act of war, which would, in effect, trigger Article 5, which says of the NATO treaty, which basically says if you attack any NATO member, there are 30 countries in NATO, other NATO countries have to come to their aid. So we're in a very dangerous territory. And I'd say to folks in Virginia and American businesses, if there is a major cyber attack in Ukraine, chances are it will not be constrained by geographic boundaries. It could affect American businesses, and clearly when Putin, or if Putin attacks and we launch major economic sanctions against Russia, there's a very high probability that Russia could react with cyber attacks against our country. So, challenging time. I am proud of the fact that the bipartisan leadership of the Senate, at my instigation, put out a statement saying we stand with the people of Ukraine, we stand with NATO, and should Putin attack, there will be the most massive amount of sanctions that our country has ever been able to put forward. So I hope and pray that a week from now we could have one of these sessions and say short term nothing has happened. But we are still in an extraordinarily dangerous week. And again, I hope all the actions of America and the West will weigh on Putin, and he won't take this effort, which could be the most dramatic effort in terms of changing boundaries of Europe since the end of the Second World War. But the alternative of giving in to a bully, giving in to a country that is not respecting the international boundaries, giving in to an authoritarian state, would encourage, whether it be that kind of Russian aggression, it would encourage the Communist Party in China and Xi Jinping taking aggressive actions in Asia. This is the reason why NATO was created back in the post-World War II world, to contain then the Soviet Union and to prevent war and to show a united front. We can't walk away from that commitment because if we did, it would be Ukraine today and Poland tomorrow and the Baltics the day after that. So this is a moment in time where, again, I hope and pray it does not come to pass, but I can't give you the assurance that if this kind of conflict arises, that there wouldn't be negative effects on our economy and on particularly energy prices. I think we need bold, dramatic economic sanctions. And this is where we need our allies. Sanctions just for America. We have trade with Russia that's roughly $28 billion. The Europeans' trade with Russia approaches $300 billion. So us cutting off our trade with Russia or cutting it back dramatically won't have the economic punch of the Europeans. And that's why it's been so important that the Biden administration has brought the Europeans along, rebuilt NATO from where it was with Trump, where he undermined NATO. And that's been a hard process. It's literally the last 3 or 4 months where we finally got that unity, number one. Number two, there are sanctions against their banks. Many of their banks, they do their settlements in dollars, rather than in rubles or in euros, and we can cut off the access of those banks to the global financial system. I think the economic minister in Russia, somebody I hope Putin is listening to, has said Russia could see a 15 to 20% decline in their GDP if these sanctions take effect. So the average everyday Russian is going to feel it in a massive way. Vladimir Putin, who's sitting on billions of dollars that he's absconded with, sitting in dachas that are incredibly luxurious, he's not going to feel the pain. The senior leaders of the Communist Party in Russia are not going to feel the pain, but the average everyday Russians, folks, will, and that I think will put enormous pressure. In terms of cyber, this has always been hypothetical, and I don't want to nerd out too much here, but Russia launched an attack against Ukraine in 2017 that used one major cyber bug. It was called the NotPetya attack. It disabled a lot of the systems in Ukraine, but because these systems are all interconnected, it ended up shutting down shipping systems around the world. It shut down systems across Europe. It cost American companies tens of billions of dollars. And that was just with one bug. The Russian cyber forces literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of tools they could unleash, just as America has hundreds, if not thousands, of tools that we could potentially unleash. We've never been in this kind of potential state of cyber war. And even if the Russians launch an attack that's geared only at Ukraine, it could have a real effect on adjacent nations. I mean, if they turn out the lights in Ukraine, but they also turn out the lights in Poland, and that leads to a crash of a NATO vehicle that got American troops in Poland, that's not a kinetic attack, But if there were loss of life, NATO lives, NATO soldier lives, because of a cyber attack in Ukraine that bled into Poland, a lot of these questions about what is an act of war, what triggers Article 5, suddenly becomes real. So I think the cyber component here is one, I've been saying for years, we need to have cyber norms. We need to have cyber red lines. We need to make clear that if you try to take down a hospital or a healthcare system, we're going to view that and we're going to go after the bad guys, whether they're cyber criminals or a government. We've not reached that kind of international understanding. And my hope and prayer is we're not thrown in to the reality of making these decisions on the fly because, again, pretty uncharted territory.